Hey guys, welcome back to War Thunder. Welcome to another episode of Longest Matches in War Thunder. The idea behind it is that we focus more on the tactics, the thought process in the video, the match played, rather than just talk about the vehicles themselves. But before we start, the overwhelming problem with titling videos is that in ground forces, you're using lineups rather than individual vehicles. So, to make things a lot easier, I usually just refer to the very first vehicle that we use, because I think that the first vehicle you spawn into the match is the most important one. Any kind of SPA protection that comes in later, any kind of close air support you might be spawning in, anything that you respawn in, you're respawning to kind of fill in the gaps that you've missed or left over when you were first playing with the initial vehicle. So for me, I was going through the respawning process on the Gepard 2, the very first one at 8.0, and it brought back a lot of memories, because when I first got this vehicle, I was anticipating mediocreness. The ATGMs are guided by WASD, which I assumed would be less accurate, and to a certain extent it is and isn't quite the case. But that's besides the point. The issue with the Gepard 2 was that when initially added into the game, it had no elevation and no depression on the rockets. It was beyond useless. And so, as I was really impatient, instead of waiting for the fix to happen, I was really grinding through it to try to get it spaded and never play it again. It was one of those tanks I just couldn't be bothered to play. And I'm happy I did, because I've got this memory of a tank that used to be very bad, and now when I play it, it's suddenly a completely different vehicle. It's still at 8.0, it has the two same rockets, same penetration, same playstyle, but with a little bit less annoyance with the fact that you can actually use the rockets and elevate them. Before that, if the tank was on uneven terrain, you couldn't really get the guns on target. Now, the tactic we're using is, we're going for the capture point. So I'm playing the Gepard, which in itself is a tank destroyer. Don't let the vehicle type kind of deteriorate what the vehicle should be played as, because what you should be looking at is acceleration, top speed, I'd say visibility, survivability, and just the ability to sit in this capture point and do a lot of work. If you look at the map, we've just solo pushed the capture point within a single minute of the match, which is very important for the ticket bleed, and now we're moving into the second stage of our attack circle, which is, well, ambushing. I've got a very nice rocket position. The first I got to spot is a T-62. Now here comes the trick. He's firing APDS FS, maybe Heat FS, maybe APDS. Whatever it is, it just went through my tank. Now, it did a lot of damage, but it didn't kill me. And unlike him, I don't have a reload. I've got two rockets waiting to be fired. And whilst they were very badly fired at him, it doesn't matter. I've set him on fire. I've destroyed his cannon breach. I've got all the time in the world to repair my track and get my reload back up and potentially go back into Alpha to replenish one of my crews. This is why vehicles such as the Hanomag Henschel, maybe the Jagdpanzer 4.5, RU-251 is a great example, light armored vehicles are very good in these top tier matchmaking scenarios, because unlike their counterparts, they don't have any armor, meaning that it doesn't really matter what you're firing at them, you will pen. And so the use of these APDS FS rounds, whilst very, very good and applicable to a tank like a Chieftain, when it comes to the Gepard, when hitting it from the side, or maybe hitting it at an angle, you will pen, you will kill the crew members inside, but not all of them. And that increases the survivability, which gives us the option to continue with our match. Now, this is where I have to understand the positioning of the map. I'm not going for the enemy spawn, I'm going sort of in between and pushing the ridgeline between Alpha and Bravo. The reason I'm doing this is because sitting on the back of the map is not going to do any favor for my team, and I've already acquired enough spawn points that in the off chance that I do get taken out, I can just spawn something else in and start providing support for my team in some other way. This is why the initial phase, I believe, is controlled by the first vehicle you spawn. That's the most important vehicle. Everything else that comes after it is usually just kind of filler-in content. You're responding to what's happening on the map, and you're spawning in whatever is best. Now, as mentioned previously, the Gepard 2 fires WASD-controlled ATGMs, and for a lot of people this is probably a problem. It's not a very good scenario. You can't move your tank when you're firing with WASD, and that controls the playstyle, and that I think is what makes me like these ATGMs so much more. I think this is the core of the ATGM. Sheridan, the IT-1, the newly added M60A2, these are all great ATGM carriers, but they're not really played as an ATGM would be. An ATGM, I think a perfect example really is the Gepard, also the HOT. Low profile, fast maneuverable, very easy to go into different flank locations, very easy to hide in plain sight, and most importantly, very precise. Maybe slight German stereotype, but for me, WASD is better than your normal HOT, purely because of the fact that you have 2 rockets, which means you do have that backup in the off chance that the first one doesn't do full damage, and it won't. ATGMs are nothing but a giant heat shell, and as much as they are easy to control over large distances, meaning you have that, input control that with a normal shell isn't there, you have to keep in mind that unless you hit the precise spot in the enemy tank, you won't do full damage. Now, taking out the cannon breach is probably the safest spot, going for the ammo rack and fuel tank the second. What I've seen a lot of people start doing, though, is turning their engine blocks towards the enemy ATGM, and if you hit the engine block whilst immobilizing the tank, you're not immobilizing the turret, which often enough could still result in a death. So, back to the match, we're flying at the CL-13. Now, the CL-13 is, in my honest opinion, the best ground pounder in the game. But not by much, because we're comparing it to the likes of other sabres, the F2 with its 20mm revolver cannons, the F25 and the F30, and then obviously to the likes of the Venom, the Vampire, maybe the Meteor from Arcade. But in general, the main problem here is that the Russians have no good close air support, with the only best jet being the MiG-17, and the best rocket guidance close air support being the Su-6. The way I use these rockets is very, very precise, and don't get deteriorated by the fact that close air support is very powerful. It is, but it's only as powerful as the person controlling it. If you're looking for an easy close air support, look no further from the British. The Vampire and the Venom, with its central mounted rockets, are very, very easy to aim. What I'm doing is I'm using the vertical guidance technique. What we're doing is we're putting the aircraft side on, which completely takes away the effect of convergence. Because these rockets on the Sabres, whilst 8 of them on each wing, are mounted very, very wide, and this can be a problem. A problem because unless the rocket hits precisely to the enemy tank, and you'd be surprised how hard it is to get these rockets reliably on target, you'll be missing. And there's no point spawning in a Sabre with 8 rockets on each wing if you're only going to hit the last 4 of them. So what I try to do is put the aircraft onto a so-called knife's edge, meaning you're using the rudder as your elevator, and your elevator as a bit of a rudder. You're inverting the controls. You're completely taken away from what normally is convergence, flipping it to the vertical, meaning the only thing you have to do now is make sure you have enough lead and one of the 2 rockets should hit the target. Obviously, this takes quite a bit of practice, but in a hands of a relatively trained, skilled pilot, close air support can and usually will yield probably at least 3 kills per run. Now, how do you get rid of close air support is probably the question that we're asked the most, and the answer obviously is not just SPA, but also fighters. This is where that early thing I talked about comes into play. Control of what's happening in the game. Having a good lineup, and knowing when and what to spawn. At the moment, I made a bit of a mistake. I went after an Su-6, and while the Su-6 is probably the worst of the ground pounders, and yet the best one available for the Russians, it's low speed. It almost acts like that story of the PO2 that shot down a MiG because the MiG was trying to shoot it down and it was going so slowly that the MiG ended up crashing. The Su-6 does have that advantage. It also has the advantage of being able to spray a little bit. It has the advantage of having 37mm cannons that you can use to penetrate the top of something like a Leo. That low speed on certain vehicles can prove to be a relatively big advantage. So what I'm doing now is I'm buying time. I don't have any SPA. They don't have an SPA. I've got a damaged engine. I'm likely not going to kill them. So I'm just trying to buy myself some time, see how the game develops. And if you look at the top of the screen, which is probably the one thing that you should be looking at all the time, the ticket advantage that we had so far is slowly going to start draining out. The enemy's capturing Bravo, meaning the ratio of capture points is 2 to 1, and we're going to start to lose points. And this is where I make my second big mistake, going after the Su-6, very determined, couldn't get good shots into it, and that dead engine is going to result in a relatively bad crash. The only thing I have to say here is that Su-6 should have been credited with a kill. Now, the match so far has been pretty bother smooth. A couple of mistakes, couple of hiccups, but nothing serious. This is where the hard mode starts. What do we spawn, and where do we spawn it? Now, if you've been paying attention, we have 3 capture points, and we have in charge of 1, that's Charlie. The enemy just captured Bravo, and Alpha's been sitting there for quite a while. Now, when I was flying out my plane, whilst looking for enemy tanks and looking for enemy aircraft, I was also making a bit of a map, a bit of a scenario of where the enemy is and what they're in. I'm 100% certain there's not a single tank in Alpha because the 2 tanks that were there also got taken out by me. Meaning, I can now take the Gepard, a very badly armoured vehicle and not a very suited one to go into a brawling match with a tank, but a very suited one for going into an empty capture point, taking it over, whilst providing air support for the team. What I'm doing is I'm killing 2 birds with 1 stone. I'm making sure that the enemy aircraft cannot come towards me, they cannot come to any of the teammates in my surrounding area, and making sure that I also get the capture point, flipping over the ticket advantage yet one more time. And I think this is one of the sole reasons why an SPA is almost an essential part of your lineup, because it's just so versatile. You can flank an enemy tank, you can go for the capture point, you can defend yourself against enemy aircraft, you can defend yourself against well, enemy tanks by shooting at the ground and creating a lot of smoke. You can just dish out some damage, get a couple of points. It is a very, very versatile vehicle, but it comes at a bit of a cost. And the cost is that if you spawn in early in the match, die in your medium tank or your heavy tank, and you're left over with just enough spawn points to take out an SPA, if you don't choose to do so, you will get a crew lock. And this is a bit of a, I guess, the bane of any SPA player, is that if you refuse to spawn it in, whether it's the map that doesn't suit you, whether it's no aircraft in the sky, that crew lock can be a little bit deteriorating, and of course players will then result into not taking SPA out at all. Now, best I can do from sitting over here is to give you a couple of tips on how to actually play SPA. For me, I play them very aggressively. My focus is not so much on aircraft at the moment, or at least in the match that we're playing. However, over the next couple of weeks, I will be extensively kind of playing, maybe reviewing, but at least taking an inside look at SPA to figure out what the best tactic is for me. Because I think I'm pretty bad at shooting down planes, and whilst you're about to see me shoot down an IL-10 and a Yak, this is a pretty simple scenario when you're playing a Gepard against what basically are 5.7, 5.3 vehicles, respectively, in top tier, because there's nothing else they could have taken out. For me, the main problem is that in ground forces, you're trying to use this reference point of how far is the enemy and how far are my traces that I'm firing respectfully at him. For me, if you recall, I do a lot of kind of long-range shooting, sniping, or at least precise shooting practice with stealth belt. I like to know not so much where the shells are going, but where they're hitting, whether they're hitting. Because with convergence, when you hit once, you'll know you're in the right spot. You start training your muscle memory, and very soon when it comes to flying something with, let's say, stealth M350 cals, it becomes a matter of reaction timing, knowing how far the enemy is, and knowing just how much you have to lead. A very, very automated system. With SPAs, though, there's a bunch of tracer fire, and tracers will tell you where the shells are traveling, not where the shells are hitting, or if they're hitting. So with that said, with ground battles and SPA, my main struggle is that I don't have any stealth belts, but that doesn't mean that I can't learn and improve. The main thing you're using the, it's like painting a line in the sky. You're looking at the enemy aircraft, you're trying to assess, assume, predict their flight path, and then just drawing a line, a straight line, where they're flying, and that in a lot of cases will result in at least some hits, if not an immediate execution. And because top tier lineup SPA, such as the Gepard, Falcon, Type 87, or the Shilka, M163 Vulcan, these will do damage if they hit. And so it's a bit of a preventive equipment in the middle of the match, effectively creating, like I used to call the expression of a dome. Within the area of the said SPA, no aircraft can come close. Now, there are certain ways to eliminate SPA from long-range combat with a very precise rocket strike, with a tank, with an ATGM, albeit if the SPA player is paying attention and being quite versatile, that is going to be very tough to do. So, reacting to the map yet again. This is what we're doing 24/7. This is the meta of Ground RB. We're now trying to take out the enemy occupants on the capture point of Alpha. And when you're making these planning attempts of going for certain capture points, eliminating certain players, sometimes you have to think a little bit hard about what you're going to do first. This is where I make a double mistake. First, I engage the T-62 that just captured the point. I've just dropped two 500 kilogram bombs somewhere in the vicinity of the enemy tank, receiving no hits, no damage, no nothing. And that's not the worst of it. I'm now going to fly around for a bit and try to deploy the second bomb whilst I'm trying to evade the enemy players. There was recently a slight change. A change to the way bombs work and a change to the effectiveness of rockets. Now, in a lot of times, I would have referred to this as a nerf, but I think what they've done is they've just made them slightly more historical and slightly harder to use. Right there, that bomb skipped over the water surface. And if I knew that, if I, would have used my brain before dropping the bomb, I could have assumed that that T-10 was a worthless target to engage anyways. So what we've just managed to achieve is spawning a bomber with a total bomb load of 1,500 kilograms and managed to successfully deliver 0 of it. And to make matters worse, the slight greed of spawn points leads to a head-on exchange with an LA-9, and we can't even get hits on him. This is why spawn points are nice for me, because in the early game I try to get as much damage out so that later on I can afford to make mistakes and still come out on top with the amount of vehicles I can spawn. So, again, we're looking at the map, we're trying to decide what the best scenario is, and I figured that spawning in the Leopard at this point, rushing in for Alpha would be the optimum. I know there's still a T-62 somewhere in the area, he's the one we're trying to find, but the reason I took the Leopard over the Hanomag Henschel, which I would have spawned unless there was a tank there. The Hanomag Henschel is good, it's very fast, I like it, but it's not optimum here because if I do get shot, I will be taken out. With the Leo, I've got the survivability option of having a turret that obviously can react to my flanks. And the reason I'm going for Alpha is because of the map orientation. Tunisia has this triple cap orientation in a vertical horizontal line. Charlie is below a bridge, Bravo is pretty much in an open surrounded by a lot of water, and Alpha is a clean city cut. At the moment, we have no capture points. This match went from good to very good to slightly worse, but now it's just gone to very, very bad late game. This is what we like to refer to as the late match. It's the classic case of tickets are bleeding out, time is running out, enemy players and friendly players are running out of respawns. So what I do is, I go into one of the corners of the map, capture point, and I pop smoke. What I'm doing with that is I'm trying to trick the enemy player into thinking, if they happen to come around, that that's where I'm hitting. Because that would be the obvious spot. If you're using smoke shells, people would probably assume that you are within the area of the smoke shell being deployed. Instead, I'm just driving around. I'm not staying stable. I don't want to do that. I don't have the time to spare. I have to get immediately out of this capture point and straight into Bravo. So, I ignore the T-62. If he does happen to come back, if he is still alive, I haven't checked the battle range yet. This is why you have to keep an eye out for what's happening in the game. If you happen to see or spot that an enemy T-62 has been taken out, that would effectively notify me that the enemy player I'm trying to find is already dead, perhaps has even left the match. But obviously it's safe to assume that he will be back, and so for me, I'm going to play a bit of a switcheroo now. Staying in Alpha is a safe way of winning, but that means the enemy knows where I'm at. If I stay there, I'm liable to get taken out. Instead, I'm going to push towards Bravo, because why? First of all, I know there's nobody in Bravo. There's no tanks around it, there's no danger here whatsoever. Plus, two of my friendly tanks have now moved into Charlie, meaning that's going to get captured and probably going to stay so for quite a while. If you look at the ticket advantage, all we have to do is capture 2 points, get a 2/3, hold that, and we win the game. And so, with the enemy, I believe, T-62 now moving back into Alpha to prevent my capture point, at this point, it doesn't really matter. And because he's still stuck in Alpha, it will take him about 1.5 to 2 minutes to capture the point, to even up the actual spawn points, and then come and try to stop me. So all I have to do is, at this point, get a defensive position somewhere behind a rock, call it camping if you want. The game is too late to try anything new, so we're just going to stick here, we're going to find a safe spot and wait out the remainder of the match. We're looking at a pure spawn point advantage, we're looking at a pure ticket advantage, and the time is ticking out anyways. This match has lasted for a pure 20 minutes, it was a very fun match to play, and matches like these are always extremely fun whenever you have a decent, if not an excellent lineup. And since I just started talking about lineups, I think I'll end it on that note, one of the most important features of the game itself. If you're looking for a good lineup spreadsheet, I'll have a link down below to a Google Doc document that's publicly open to everybody, portraying currently lineups between 5.7 and 9.0. I will be working on lineups below 5.7. It will take a couple of days. It's definitely a well-structured thing that has to be thought out. I have to play a couple of matches as well. But in general, if you find anything that is misleading, anything that I've missed, any mistakes, any kind of machine you might want to have added, by all means, point it out in the comment section down below, PM me on Discord, Twitch chat, whatever the contacts you use, just point out the battle rating, point out the problematic tanks, and we'll take a look at it. But in general, to kind of combine a good lineup, you're looking at least 5 vehicles. You want something to capture with, you want something to defend with, you want something to enforce with, something to provide fighter support, and something to prevent fighters from taking you out. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. It was a fantastic match to play, more than 10,000 RP gained, and over 100,000 silver lines. One of the most incredible matches that always happens when good teams come together, clash with good lineups. Have a good one.